Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. Tonight, we drift into consciousness, the quiet inner presence through which every sound, memory, thought, feeling, and dream becomes known. It is the most intimate part of life, and also one of the most mysterious. Before you can remember the day behind you, imagine the day ahead, or notice the softness of the room around you, there must first be this gentle state of being aware. You are using it now. Perhaps you can feel the weight of the blanket or the outline of the pillow beneath your head. Perhaps you notice the temperature of the air, the darkness behind closed eyes, or the faint movement of thought as one idea loosens and gives way to another. You hear these words, and without effort, they gather into meaning. All of this feels ordinary, and yet, hidden inside that ordinariness, there is something extraordinary. A human brain, built from living cells, electrical pulses, and chemical signals, somehow gives rise to conscious experience. Not only motion, not only reflex, not only the ability to react to the world, but the inward experience of being here within it. Science can trace circuits, rhythms, and regions of the brain with remarkable precision, and still the simple fact of consciousness remains one of the deepest questions we know. If SleepWise helps you settle at night, you can follow along and share it with someone whose mind also takes a little longer to grow quiet. One reason consciousness is so difficult to study is that it never arrives in separate pieces. The brain is constantly receiving signals from the eyes, ears, skin, lungs, heart, and deeper tissues of the body. It sorts, predicts, filters, compares, and remembers. It links the present moment to the one just before it. It blends sensation with mood, attention with memory, and expectation with perception. Yet, you do not experience any of that hidden labor directly. You do not feel the assembly. You receive the finished scene, a room, a thought, a voice, a self. The world comes to you already woven together. That may be the first quiet wonder of consciousness. Not only that awareness exists, but that it feels so continuous, so immediate, so whole. Even when your attention drifts, even when memory softens, even when sleep begins gathering at the edges, the mind keeps shaping a private world from countless hidden processes below the surface. And so tonight, we will move slowly through that hidden architecture. We will wander through attention and perception, memory and identity, dreams and altered states, religious attempts to explain the inner life, and the modern science that has brought us close to the brain without fully dissolving the mystery. For now, there is nothing to solve. Only rest for a moment in the quiet truth that you're here, listening, breathing, conscious, while the night deepens softly around you. And so, before we go any deeper, it helps to begin with a quiet distinction. Consciousness is often spoken of as though it were one single thing, like a lamp that is either on or off. But the mind is more layered than that. To be awake is not quite the same as to be aware, and to be aware is not quite the same as to pay attention. You have likely felt this in the first minutes after waking. The eyes may open, the body may shift, a room may slowly return. And yet the world does not always arrive all at once. Wakefulness comes first as a threshold. Awareness follows with texture and clarity. Attention, slower still, begins choosing what to hold and what to leave in the background. Scientists often separate these states carefully. Wakefulness is the broad condition of being rousable rather than asleep. Awareness is something more intimate. It is the presence of experience itself. The fact that sound is heard, that pressure is felt, that an image, a memory, or a mood can appear within the mind at all. Attention is narrower. It does not create consciousness, but it shapes it. It moves through awareness like a lantern in a dark garden, resting for a moment on one path while the rest remains dimmer. Even now, as you listen, there may be other things around you. The temperature of the room, the touch of fabric, a distant hum beyond the walls, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. Much of it stays at the edge of notice until attention turns and touches it. This selectiveness is not a flaw. It is one of the quiet mercies of the mind. At every moment, the brain receives more information than conscious life could fully hold. Light enters the eyes. Pressure meets the skin. The body reports pulse, breath, fatigue, hunger, and ease. Memory offers fragments. Emotion colors them. Expectation leans forward, preparing for what might come next. Without some way of sorting and prioritizing, experience would become crowded. And so consciousness is not a flat surface, but a layered field. Some things stand in the center, others wait at the margins. A sound you barely noticed may suddenly become obvious. A worry in the background may drift forward and take shape. A scent may change your mood before you have named it. The mind is always arranging nearness and distance, brightness and shadow. This is why the study of consciousness begins with several questions. What makes a brain wakeful? What allows experience to appear? What determines which part of that experience becomes the focus of thought? These are related questions, but they are not identical. For tonight, that is enough to carry with us. That consciousness has layers, that awareness can be wide even when attention is narrow, and that the mind is always doing more than it reveals. The finished moment feels effortless, but beneath that calm surface, quiet processes are already at work, gathering the world and placing it, piece by piece, before you. If consciousness has layers, then the next question follows gently on its own. What in the living body allows wakefulness to return, awareness to gather, and attention to move across the inner field of experience? For modern science, the answer begins with the brain. Not as a single glowing center where a tiny self sits and watches the world, but as a vast living network of cells, signals, rhythms, and exchanges. The human brain contains tens of billions of neurons linked to one another in dense and changing patterns. These cells communicate in pulses, passing information through circuits that are always adjusting, strengthening, quieting, and combining. And yet the brain is not merely a machine, in the cold industrial sense. It is soft living tissue, folded into itself, sustained by blood, shaped by sleep, stress, memory, age, and experience. Every moment, it receives signals from the eyes, ears, skin, muscles, lungs, heart, and deeper organs, while also drawing on memory, expectation, and emotion. Out of all this motion, the mind somehow produces a world. Different parts of the brain contribute different kinds of work. Deep regions help regulate arousal, keeping the body somewhere between alertness and sleep. Broad networks across the cortex help process vision, sound, touch, language, and planning. Other systems help attach emotional significance, link moments into memory, and decide what deserves closer notice. No single piece does everything. Consciousness appears to depend less on one special location than on coordination across many regions at once. This is one reason injuries to the brain can alter consciousness in such different ways. Damage in one place may affect speech, in another memory, in another the ability to recognize faces, track movement, or remain awake at all. Awareness is not a simple substance stored in one hidden chamber. It is more like an activity that depends on timing, connection, and the steady cooperation of many systems. What is remarkable is how unified the final experience feels. The brain handles color in one set of circuits, sound in another, body position in another, memory in another, and still the world arrives as one scene. You hear the voice, feel the blanket, sense the room, and remain yourself within it, all at once. So the brain, at least as science now understands it, is not a container for consciousness so much as its changing physical basis. When its rhythms are disrupted, consciousness may blur. When its activity becomes richly integrated, the world appears with clarity. But the mystery is not fully gone. We know that consciousness depends on the brain. We do not yet fully understand how activity in living tissue becomes the inward life you know from within. What reaches consciousness does not arrive as a perfect copy of the world. It arrives as a construction, graceful, efficient, and convincing enough that we rarely notice how much quiet editing has already taken place. Sight feels immediate, as though the eyes simply open and reality pours in. But perception is less like a window and more like a careful act of assembly. Light enters the eye as scattered information. The retina begins the work of sorting patterns, edges, contrast, and motion. Signals travel onward, and the brain compares them with memory, expectation, and context. From this, it builds what seems to be a seamless scene. We do not experience raw fragments. We experience the finished image. That is why the mind can be reliable and easy to fool. Each eye has a blind spot where the optic nerve leaves the retina, and yet, in ordinary life, you never see a dark hole floating through the world. The brain quietly fills the gap. It borrows from surrounding shapes and colors, smoothing absence into continuity. The mind also stitches across the tiny jolts of eye movement that happen as your gaze shifts. The world appears still and stable, though your eyes are always in motion. Illusions reveal this hidden labor with unusual clarity. A line can seem longer than it is because of the arrows around it. A color can look different depending on the shade beside it. A still image can appear to shimmer or drift. These are not failures of a careless system. They show that perception is interpretive. The brain is not merely recording the world, it is making its best, fastest model of it. Even time itself is gently arranged. Sound and sight do not travel through the body at the same speed. Touch, emotion, and expectation each have their own timing as well, yet consciousness usually receives them as one coordinated present. The brain waits, aligns, predicts, and blends, so that the world feels coherent rather than delayed and fragmented. This may be one of the strangest truths about awareness, that what feels most direct has already been prepared. By the time a face is recognized, a voice understood, or a room felt as calm or unfamiliar, layers of hidden processing have already shaped the experience. Consciousness arrives closer to the end, where the work has become smooth enough to feel effortless. And perhaps that is why perception feels so natural. The mind conceals its own craftsmanship. It offers not the rough scaffolding, but the completed room. It hands you a world already lit, already ordered, already made to seem whole. So, when you sense the darkness around you now, or picture a remembered place, you are not receiving reality untouched. You are living inside a beautifully edited version of it, shaped by biology, memory, prediction, and the quiet genius of a brain that is always composing the world before you know it. If perception builds the scene, attention decides where the light will fall within it. Consciousness may be wide, but attention is narrow. It does not hold the whole world with equal force. It selects, brightens, and leaves much else in softer shadow. You can feel this even now. There may be the touch of fabric at your shoulder, the weight of the blanket, the coolness of the air, the rhythm of your breathing, the distant hush beyond the room, and the procession of thoughts moving through the mind. All of it may be present at once, yet only one or two things stand in the center at any moment. Attention moves among them, gentle and decisive. This selectiveness is not a weakness of consciousness. It is one of the ways the mind remains livable. At every second, the brain receives far more information than awareness could fully hold in detail. If every sound, sensation, memory, and possibility arrived with equal brightness, experience would become crowded and unmanageable. Attention protects against that flood. Sometimes, attention is guided from outside. A sudden sound, a flash of motion, pain, or the speaking of your name can pull the mind sharply in one direction. Sometimes it is guided from within. A memory can surface and take the foreground. A private worry can grow louder than the room itself. A person may look directly at a page and still remember none of it, because attention has drifted elsewhere. Psychologists have long been fascinated by how easily this happens. In experiments, people asked to count moving objects may completely miss an unexpected figure crossing the scene. Others may fail to notice a change in a face or background element that seems obvious once pointed out. This is called inattentional blindness. It is the cost of selection. To notice one thing deeply is often to miss another. And yet, the unattended world does not vanish. It waits at the margins, exerting a softer influence. A smell may alter mood before you name it. A melody in another room may stir memory before thought catches up. The body can feel tense before the mind identifies why. Attention does not create reality. It simply determines which part of it becomes sharp enough to claim the center. This means that conscious life is always being shaped by what is emphasized and what is allowed to fade. In waking hours, this keeps us directed. At night, as attention loosens, the field can widen. Thoughts drift more freely. Associations become softer. The spotlight grows less fixed. Perhaps that is why the approach to sleep can feel so unusual. The world does not disappear all at once. It slowly stops insisting on itself. Attention releases its grip, and consciousness begins to float more gently among sounds, sensations, and fragments of thought. So perception gives you a world. Attention tells you where, within that world, to rest your mind, and where, at least for now, to let the darkness remain undisturbed. Perception and attention bring the world into view, but consciousness is shaped by something quieter as well, the steady conversation between brain and body. We often imagine awareness as beginning in the eyes and ears, as though the mind were mostly a spectator looking outward. Yet much of conscious life rises from within. Even now, beneath whatever thoughts may be passing through your mind, the body is sending its report. The lungs expand and settle. The heart keeps time. Muscles hold tension or ease. Hormones move silently through the bloodstream, altering alertness, calm, hunger, and fatigue. Most of this does not arrive in words, and yet it helps determine the mood in which every word is heard. Scientists call this inward sensing interoception, the brain's perception of the body's internal condition. It is not as vivid as sight, and not as easy to describe as sound, but it may be just as important. A person does not simply think their way through life. They feel their way through it, often by reading signals that begin in the chest, the stomach, the lungs, and the skin. This helps explain why the same bodily change can become different experiences in different settings. A racing heart at night may feel like worry. The same racing heart before good news may feel like excitement. Butterflies in the stomach can mean dread, anticipation, or desire. The body provides the raw sensation. Consciousness interprets it. Breathing offers one of the clearest examples. A quick, shallow breath can make the world seem tighter, more urgent. A slow exhale can soften awareness before a single reassuring thought has appeared. In this sense, consciousness is not merely informed by the body. It is constantly being tuned by it. The same is true of fatigue. When the body is depleted, attention narrows, patience thins, memory slips, and minor problems can feel larger than they are. Hunger can make a room feel less friendly. Pain can shrink awareness until everything gathers around one bright point. Warmth can soothe. A clenched jaw can quietly signal danger even when no danger is present. And the conversation runs both ways. A remembered embarrassment can flush the skin. A sudden fear can tighten the chest. A hopeful thought can lighten the limbs before anything outside has changed. Consciousness is never only abstract thought floating above the body. It is the meeting place where tissues, rhythms, sensations, memories, and meanings are woven into one felt life. Perhaps that is why rest begins in such humble ways, not with a theory, but with a slower breath, not with a revelation, but with the shoulders loosening and the heart no longer needing to hurry. The body speaks in pulses and pressures, and consciousness listens. Tonight, as the mind grows quieter, part of what you are feeling is not just thought becoming calm. It is the intimate work of the body helping awareness find its softer shape. From the body, the story of consciousness leads naturally into memory, because awareness is never only about what is happening now. The present is always threaded with what came before it. Even this moment is joined to earlier moments so smoothly that you rarely notice the stitching. Every sentence you hear remains meaningful only because the one before it has not vanished. Memory is often imagined as storage, as though the brain were a library placing each event carefully on a shelf. But memory is less like storage and more like reconstruction. Each time the mind recalls something, it rebuilds it. Details are strengthened, softened, omitted, or rearranged. A remembered day is not the day itself. It is the brain's latest version of it. This matters deeply for consciousness because memory creates continuity. Without it, experience would break into disconnected pieces. A person might still feel light, sound, touch, hunger, or fear, but the thread of identity would loosen. The reason the one lying here tonight feels like the same person who woke this morning is that the brain has carried enough of the recent past forward to keep the self intact. One of the clearest windows into this came from a patient known as HM, a man whose surgery relieved severe seizures but left him unable to form lasting new memories. He could hold a conversation for a short while, but once attention moved on, the moment would not settle into durable recollection. He remained conscious, yet his present could not easily become part of a continuing personal story. His life taught neuroscience a humbling lesson. Consciousness can survive without strong memory, but it changes shape when the bridge to the recent past is damaged. Memory is also less reliable than we like to believe. People can remember events that never happened, or recall them with confidence while getting important details wrong. A suggestion, a photograph, a family story repeated often enough, all can alter what feels certain. This is not because memory is lazy. It is because memory is useful. It preserves meaning more faithfully than detail. There are many kinds of memory at work within consciousness. Some are factual, names, places, dates, stories. Others are procedural, how to read, walk, drive, or fasten a button. Others are emotional, carrying the body's record of comfort, embarrassment, fear, or trust. A room can feel safe before the mind has explained why. A melody can stir sadness before its source is named. The past does not stay behind us in silence. It leans gently into the present, tinting what we notice and what we expect. So consciousness is never a single bright point suspended in isolation. It is a moving present, carried by memory through time. Even now, as thought slows and the night grows softer, memory continues its work, preserving just enough of what has been for experience to remain coherent and for the self to keep flowing onward. If memory helps consciousness feel continuous, it also helps explain why awareness seems to belong to someone. Experience does not arrive as a loose collection of colors, sounds, and sensations floating in empty space. It arrives with a center. There is a persistent sense that these thoughts are mine. This body is mine. This life is unfolding from somewhere within. That feeling is so immediate that it can seem impossible to question. And yet, the science of selfhood suggests something more subtle. The self may not be a single fixed thing hidden deep inside the mind. It may be a construction, useful, stable enough for daily life, and assembled from many processes working together. Memory contributes. Body signals contribute. Language contributes. Social life contributes. The brain gathers all of this and presents a point of view. One clue comes from body ownership illusions. In a famous experiment, a person watches a fake rubber hand being stroked while their real hand, hidden from view, is touched in exactly the same way. After a short time, many begin to feel that the rubber hand belongs to them. If the fake hand is threatened, they may flinch. The illusion is simple, but its lesson is profound. The brain can be persuaded to redraw the boundary of the self. Other cases are stranger still. People with phantom limbs may feel pain or movement in an arm or leg that is no longer there. The body, as consciousness knows it, is not a perfect map of flesh. It is the brain's model of a body, usually reliable, sometimes hauntingly wrong. Even the inner story of who we are is less solid than it seems. Human beings are natural narrators. We explain our choices, defend our motives, and arrange memories into a personal history. This is not deception. It is how the self gains continuity. But the story is often edited after the fact. We may decide first and explain later. We may remember selectively and call it certainty. The self is not only felt, it is narrated. Perhaps the most surprising implication is that the self can be both real and constructed at the same time. A map is not the land, yet it is still real enough to guide a journey. In the same way, the brain's model of a self may not be a tiny inner ruler sitting behind the eyes, but it may still be the form in which experience becomes manageable, social, and coherent. There are moments when this becomes easier to notice. In embarrassment, the self feels overexposed. In deep concentration, it can fade as the task fills awareness. In dreams, it survives even when logic loosens around it. The self is durable, but not fixed. It sharpens, softens, expands, contracts. Tonight, it may be enough to notice this gently, that the self is not a hard stone hidden somewhere inside you. It is a living pattern, a way the mind keeps experience gathered close. Consciousness does not merely reveal a world. It also quietly reveals the one who seems to stand within it. Once consciousness begins to feel continuous, embodied, and gathered into a self, another question rises at once. How much of what we do is guided by conscious awareness, and how much begins before awareness has caught up? When you decide to lift a hand, speak a sentence, or turn away from one thought and toward another, what part of that action belongs to consciousness, and what part was already set in motion below it? This question has occupied philosophers for centuries, but neuroscience gave it a modern twist. In a now famous set of experiments, researchers such as Benjamin Libet asked people to make a small spontaneous movement while noting the moment they became aware of the wish to act. In many cases, measurable activity in the brain appeared a fraction of a second before the person reported the conscious decision. The result did not prove that free will is an illusion, and many researchers still debate how much the experiment really shows. But it suggested something unsettling and fascinating at once, that conscious intention may not always be the first spark. Daily life already hints at this. A hand reaches to catch a falling object before thought has formed a sentence about it. A familiar route is driven almost automatically while the mind wanders elsewhere. A reply rises toward the lips before being restrained. Much of the brain is always preparing, predicting, and initiating beneath the level of conscious narration. And yet, consciousness still matters. If it were only a spectator, unable to shape what followed, human life would feel very different. The more careful view is that awareness may not generate every impulse, but it can influence whether an impulse is carried forward, redirected, or stopped. Some neuroscientists have suggested that conscious will may function less as an origin point and more as a kind of gate, a place where possible actions become visible enough to be accepted, delayed, modified, or refused. You can sense this in ordinary moments of hesitation. You feel irritation rise, but let it soften before speaking. You notice the urge to keep looking at a screen, and instead place it down and turn toward sleep. The impulse may have arrived from somewhere deeper and earlier than conscious thought, but consciousness can still meet it, shape it, and sometimes quiet it. Perhaps freedom is not the absolute independence we once imagined, as though the conscious self stood apart from the body and issued commands from some untouched inner throne. Perhaps it lies in the mind's capacity to reflect on what is arising, to hold competing possibilities in view, and to guide behavior over time rather than in a single magical instant. That is a quieter kind of freedom, but maybe a more believable one. Consciousness may not begin every movement, but it may still be where impulse becomes knowable, where habit can be interrupted, and where a life gradually acquires intention. By now, the story of consciousness has moved through perception, attention, body, memory, selfhood, and choice. It arrives at the threshold closest to sleep, the place where wakefulness begins to loosen. Sleep is often spoken of as though consciousness simply switches off there like a lamp in an empty room. But the truth is gentler. Consciousness does not usually vanish all at once. It thins, drifts, and changes texture. You may know the feeling well. Thoughts begin to lose their sharp edges. Time stretches or blurs. The room is still present, but less insistent. One thought slips into another with unusual softness. A memory, an image, or a fragment of dialogue may appear without invitation. This early borderland has a name: hypnagogia. It is the passage into sleep when waking logic has begun to loosen its grip. Science describes sleep in stages, but from the inside it can feel like a slow migration. As sleep pressure builds across the day, chemicals such as adenosine accumulate in the brain, helping create the feeling of tiredness. Later, melatonin rises with darkness, supporting the body's clock. The brain does not stop working. It begins working differently. In lighter sleep, awareness can still flicker near the surface. A sound may be heard. A name may be recognized. Sometimes the mind startles itself with a sudden falling sensation or a brief muscle jerk. In deeper stages, conscious experience becomes harder to sustain in any ordinary form. The brain remains active, but awareness narrows, fragments, or disappears from recall. And then, later in the night, another form of consciousness returns. In rapid eye movement sleep, or REM, the brain can become highly active again, while the body stays largely still. Dreams arise here with vividness, visual, emotional, associative, often strange, yet convincing while they last. In dreams, the mind can accept impossible transitions and broken logic without protest. The self remains, but the rules of the waking world no longer hold so firmly. This is part of what makes sleep such a profound window into consciousness. It shows that awareness is not a single fixed state. It can be alert, drowsy, fragmented, dreamlike, or absent from memory. Sleep does not merely remove consciousness. It reshapes it. Perhaps that is why the approach to sleep can feel so mysterious from within. Attention releases its grip. The outer world matters a little less. The mind becomes more associative, less deliberate, more willing to follow a drifting image or a half-formed thought. The stream of consciousness does not stop. It widens and begins to carry you. So tonight, as your own awareness moves toward that borderland, it may help to remember that sleep is not a failure of consciousness. It is one of its natural transformations, a nightly passage into other modes of mind, where wakefulness gives way not to nothing, but to quieter and stranger forms of being. Sleep does not end the story of consciousness. It changes its stage, and nowhere is that change more vivid than in dreaming, where awareness continues under different rules, looser, stranger, and often more emotional than waking life. Modern sleep science shows that dreams are not idle shadows. During rapid eye movement sleep, or REM, the brain becomes highly active again. Visual areas can light up. Emotional centers become lively. Regions involved in planning and logical control often grow quieter. The result is a state in which images, memory fragments, feelings, and associations combine with unusual freedom. That helps explain why dreams feel both convincing and unstable. A room may become a city without transition. A stranger may somehow be understood as a childhood friend. A conversation may seem deeply important even when its logic disappears on waking. The dreaming mind is still generating a world, but it is doing so with less supervision from the systems that keep waking life orderly. Dreams are not random in the simple sense. They often draw from recent concerns, unfinished emotions, old memories, and the day's leftover impressions. A face glimpsed in passing, a private worry, a forgotten hallway from childhood. Any of these may be lifted from storage and woven into the night. Sleep researchers sometimes call this day residue, the quiet way waking life leaves its fingerprints on the dream world. And yet, dreams are not mere replay. The mind transforms what it borrows. It compresses time, merges people, alters places, exaggerates fear, and releases chains of association that waking attention would usually keep in tighter order. In dreams, consciousness becomes more visual, more symbolic, more willing to accept impossible turns without protest. This is why dreams matter in the story of consciousness. They show that awareness does not require the stable, shared world of waking life. The mind can generate an entire lived reality from within. While the body lies still in the dark, the dreamer may run, speak, grieve, hope, remember, or panic inside a world made almost entirely of internal activity. Sometimes a small measure of waking reflection returns within the dream itself. This is lucid dreaming, the rare state in which the dreamer realizes they are dreaming while the dream continues around them. For a few moments, consciousness holds both realities at once, the imagined world of the dream and the knowledge that the sleeping body lies elsewhere, safe in bed. Perhaps that is one of the gentlest lessons of dreaming. Consciousness is not tied to one form of order. It can inhabit the outward world, and it can wander through worlds of its own making. Even in sleep, the mind continues its quiet work, shaping images, feelings, and fleeting stories beneath the surface of rest. If dreams reveal that consciousness can loosen from the outer world, other altered states show that it can also narrow, deepen, expand, or take on an almost sacred intensity. Across cultures, people have long noticed that awareness is not fixed. It can be transformed by prayer, fasting, chanting, meditation, breath, grief, music, pain, silence, or prolonged solitude. Long before neuroscience had words for attention networks or brain rhythms, people knew from experience that consciousness could change its texture. A person sitting in stillness for hours might feel the usual chatter of the mind grow quieter. A worshiper, singing in rhythm with others, might feel carried beyond the ordinary boundary of self. A hermit in the desert, a monk at prayer, a pilgrim walking for days, a dancer moving in ritual repetition. Each might enter a state in which time feels altered and the world seems newly charged with meaning. Not all such states are calm. Some traditions speak of ecstasy, vision, possession, revelation, or overwhelming presence. Others value steadier forms of attention, in which consciousness becomes less crowded and more clear. The outward practices vary greatly, but they point to the same fact. Awareness can be trained, strained, intensified, quieted, and reorganized. Modern science does not dismiss this variability. It studies meditation, hypnosis, flow states, sensory deprivation, and other altered conditions as real changes in cognition and brain activity. In deep concentration, regions linked to self-focused thought may quiet. In flow, attention can become so absorbed that time seems to contract. In sensory deprivation, the lack of external input can make inner imagery more vivid. In each case, consciousness shifts because its usual balance of perception, attention, and self-monitoring has changed. This is one reason altered states have mattered so much to religion. They offered not theories, but experiences, episodes in which ordinary awareness seemed opened, pierced, deepened, or lifted into something larger. A dream could feel like a message. A trance could feel like contact. A sudden stillness could feel like truth itself. Whether one interprets such moments spiritually, psychologically, or both, they remain central to the human story of consciousness. They show that awareness is not a single flat condition. It is a landscape with many climates. Some are bright and analytical. Some are diffuse and dreamlike. Some are collective, rhythmic, and emotionally charged. Some are still enough to feel almost transparent. Perhaps that is why people have always approached consciousness with more than curiosity. They approached it with reverence. When awareness changes deeply enough, it can seem as though reality itself has changed. And that feeling has shaped religions, philosophies, and inner disciplines for thousands of years. For centuries, the deepest divide in the study of consciousness lay between spiritual and material explanations. Was awareness something sacred and immaterial, only temporarily housed in the body? Or was it a process emerging from living tissue, vulnerable to chemistry, injury, and sleep? Modern medicine did not settle the question completely, but it changed its terms by revealing how precisely consciousness can be dimmed, interrupted, and sometimes restored. Anesthesia is one of the clearest examples. A patient may speak, listen, and respond one moment, then drift into unawareness under the influence of a carefully chosen drug. The body remains alive. The heart continues. Surgeons work. Hours later, consciousness returns, often with no memory of the intervening time. Few experiences have taught scientists more plainly that awareness depends on specific brain conditions. Change the chemistry of the brain in the right way, and the inner world can disappear. And yet anesthesia is not simple. Different drugs act on different systems. Some sedate more than they erase awareness. Some alter memory, so that experience cannot later be recalled. Others seem to disrupt the brain's ability to integrate information across broad networks. For doctors, the practical task is safety. For scientists, the deeper lesson is that consciousness has physical preconditions delicate enough to be shifted by molecules. Coma and related disorders reveal something equally sobering. A person may have periods of wakefulness without clear awareness, opening their eyes yet showing little evidence of an inner scene. Others may be minimally conscious, able to follow a command only occasionally, or to signal some awareness in ways so slight they can easily be missed. In recent decades, brain imaging has shown that a few patients once thought entirely unresponsive may still retain hidden islands of consciousness. These cases have forced medicine into humility. Consciousness is first person, but science must often infer it from outward signs. Movement, speech, eye tracking, or brain activity. That creates uncertainty at the very edge where certainty matters most. Is the person aware? Is some private experience still flickering behind the stillness of the body? In this way, anesthesia and coma have become more than medical topics. They are windows into the conditions that make consciousness possible. They show that awareness is neither all or nothing, nor easily measured by appearance alone. It can be interrupted, fragmented, hidden, and sometimes recovered. Perhaps this is one reason the mystery remains so powerful. We can watch consciousness leave and return. We can alter it with drugs, injury, sleep, and stimulation. We can identify some of the networks that support it. And still, the presence or absence of an inner world remains one of the most consequential things we ever try to know about another human being. Once science accepted that consciousness depends on the brain, a new question took shape. What kind of brain activity is required? It is not enough to say that neurons fire because neurons are active during many unconscious processes as well. The challenge is to explain what is special about the patterns that accompany conscious experience. What makes a thought enter awareness rather than remain hidden below it? One influential answer is known as global workspace theory. In simple terms, it suggests that much of the brain works locally and quietly, carrying out specialized tasks without entering awareness. But when certain information becomes important enough, it is broadcast more widely across the brain, made available to memory, language, planning, and decision-making all at once. Consciousness, in this picture, is something like global access, the moment a signal reaches the larger stage. Another major approach is integrated information theory. It begins from a different intuition. Consciousness, it argues, is linked not merely to how much information a system processes, but to how unified and interdependent that information is. A conscious state is not just busy. It is internally woven such that its parts cannot be fully separated without changing the whole. A third line of thought, often associated with predictive processing, emphasizes that the brain is constantly generating models of the world. It anticipates, updates, compares, and revises. In this view, conscious experience may reflect the brain's best ongoing model of what is happening within the body and beyond it. None of these theories has solved consciousness. Each illuminates one part of the puzzle while leaving other parts in shadow. But together, they show how the science has matured. The goal is no longer simply to call consciousness mysterious. It is to ask which architectures, rhythms, and forms of integration make awareness possible. That is why researchers search for neural signatures, patterns in electrical activity, communication between brain regions, and changes during sleep, anesthesia, or injury that may mark the presence or absence of awareness. Even so, the difficulty remains profound. Consciousness is private. Science works from the outside. The experimenter can observe behavior, scan the brain, and record signals, but cannot step directly into another mind. And so the study of consciousness has become both more precise and more humble. Theories grow sharper, methods improve. Yet the central challenge remains what it has always been: how to connect physical process with lived experience, how to explain not only what the brain does, but why any of it should feel like something from within. For now, that bridge is still incomplete, but perhaps even that incompleteness has its own quiet beauty. The mind has learned enough to sketch the outline of its mystery, even if it has not yet reached the center. Beyond the hospital ward and the laboratory, the story of consciousness opens into the wider living world. If awareness depends on a brain, then the next question is whether human beings are alone in possessing a rich inner life, or whether consciousness appears in many forms across the animal kingdom. For a long time, people answered too quickly. Animals were often described as instinctive machines, creatures that moved, hunted, nested, fled, and fed, yet supposedly lacked the inward depth that humans recognize in themselves. Modern biology has made that confidence harder to keep. Again and again, animal behavior suggests memory, planning, emotion, play, social loyalty, grief-like responses, and sometimes a flexibility that feels difficult to explain as mere reflex. The trouble, of course, is that no animal can sit for an interview and describe the feeling of being itself. So science must work indirectly. Researchers look at problem-solving, learning, pain behavior, cooperation, tool use, navigation, sleep, and self-recognition. None of these offers a perfect window into consciousness, but together they suggest that awareness may not be a human monopoly. The examples are quietly remarkable. Crows can solve multi-step puzzles and remember human faces for years. Dolphins learn complex signals and coordinate socially in fluid ways. Elephants appear to mourn their dead and revisit bones with unusual care. Octopuses, whose nervous systems are organized very differently from ours, explore objects, escape enclosures, and adapt with startling independence. Even bees can learn routes, distinguish patterns, and communicate the location of food through movement alone. Pain has become one of the most ethically important clues. Many animals do more than recoil in the instant. They guard an injury, avoid the place where it happened, seek relief, and alter later behavior as though the unpleasantness matters from the inside. Play, too, tells its own story. Young mammals and birds often rehearse the world through exploration that is unnecessary for immediate survival, as though consciousness even in simpler forms, is not only reactive, but curious. Sleep adds another layer. Many animals pass through states resembling deep sleep and REM. Some birds appear to dream. Octopuses change color dramatically while asleep, as though inner scenes may be passing through them. No one can say what it is like to be a whale, a dog, or a raven. But the old certainty that vivid experience belongs only to us has grown more fragile with every decade. Perhaps the wisest picture is not a sharp line between conscious and unconscious creatures, but a spectrum of minds, some reflective, some immediate, some highly social, some intensely sensory, each shaped by the body that carries it. Human consciousness may be unusually language-rich and self-examining, but it may still belong to a much wider family of awareness on Earth. If animal consciousness widens the circle of awareness beyond humanity, machine consciousness raises a more unsettling possibility. Could something built rather than born ever become conscious? Could a system made of circuits, code, and silicon possess not only intelligence, but inner experience? This question has grown more urgent as machines have become better at tasks once thought deeply human. They can recognize patterns, generate language, imitate conversation, produce images, defeat champions at games, and search through oceans of information in moments. But intelligence and consciousness are not the same thing. A system may solve problems with astonishing speed and still provide no reason to think anything is being felt from within. That distinction matters. A calculator performs operations without awareness. A thermostat responds to temperature without any private sense of warmth or cold. Even a highly sophisticated program may still be doing only this: processing inputs, selecting outputs, and optimizing performance without any inward point of view. The old mystery remains. What kind of system, if any, gives rise to felt experience rather than behavior alone? Some researchers argue that if a machine were organized in the right way, richly integrated, flexible, self-monitoring, and able to sustain a unified model of itself and the world, then consciousness might, in principle, emerge. Others remain skeptical. They suggest that simulation is not the same as subjectivity. A machine may describe pain or loneliness while still having no more inner life than a mirror reflecting human language back to us. This is why the old Turing test, interesting though it is, does not settle the question. Passing as conscious is not the same as being conscious. The challenge is not merely to create performance that resembles thought. It is to understand whether performance alone could ever become experience. There is another difficulty as well. Human beings are natural projectors of mind. We see faces in clouds, intention in motion, and emotion in machines that were never designed to feel anything at all. A chatbot that speaks gently or a robot that tilts its head can awaken sympathy almost immediately. That sympathy may say more about us than about the machine, and yet the question refuses to go away. If consciousness is an emergent property of organized matter, biology may not hold a monopoly forever. If, on the other hand, conscious experience depends on features of living tissue, embodiment, metabolism, or evolutionary need, then machine awareness may remain out of reach. For now, no consensus exists. Perhaps that uncertainty is itself revealing. Artificial intelligence has not solved consciousness. It has clarified how little we understand it. We can build systems that imitate reasoning in powerful ways, yet still remain unsure what separates awareness from its convincing reflection. After all of this, perception and memory, dreams and religion, anesthesia, animals, and artificial minds, the deepest question remains where it was from the beginning. Why should any of it feel like something from the inside? Philosophers sometimes call this the hard problem of consciousness. It is not the problem of how the brain detects color, stores memory, guides movement, or directs attention. Those are difficult questions, but they are questions about function. The harder question is why any of these functions should be accompanied by experience at all. Why should neural activity produce the redness of red, the sting of pain, the hush of relief, or the inward brightness of a thought becoming clear? Some thinkers believe this mystery will eventually yield to science, just as older mysteries once did. Others suspect that consciousness may force a deeper revision in how we understand reality. A few have proposed that mind, in some faint or fundamental sense, may be more widely woven into nature than we assumed. Others resist that conclusion, preferring to wait for better theories, better tools, and better questions. What is striking is that none of these paths feels entirely comfortable. If we say consciousness is merely brain activity, we are left wondering why brain activity should ever become experience. If we say consciousness is something irreducible, we preserve the mystery but lose explanatory power. If we spread mind through all matter, we close one gap only by opening another. Every answer seems to solve part of the puzzle while leaving another part in shadow. Perhaps that is why consciousness has remained a meeting place for science, philosophy, and religion. It invites measurement, but also introspection. It belongs to biology, but touches ethics. It can be described in terms of neurons and chemistry, yet it still carries the weight of much older questions. What is the self? What survives change? What does it mean to be aware at all? For all our progress, we remain at a threshold. We understand more about sleep, perception, memory, anesthesia, and brain injury than earlier centuries ever could. We can test theories and compare them. We can sketch some of the conditions under which consciousness appears and fades. But the final bridge between mechanism and felt life is still incomplete. There is no shame in that incompleteness. Some mysteries shrink as knowledge advances. Others become more beautiful because knowledge sharpens them. Consciousness may be one of those. The more carefully we study it, the more remarkable it seems, not less. We have learned enough to see the outline of the puzzle with greater precision, and perhaps that, too, is a kind of progress. Not the end of wonder, but its deepening. From these altered states grew many of humanity's great religious explanations of consciousness. If awareness could survive dreams, visions, trance, and the strange suspension of sleep, perhaps it was more than bodily function. Perhaps there was an inner essence, soul, spirit, breath, life force, that animated the body but was not identical to it. Again and again, cultures linked consciousness with breath. The connection is easy to understand. Breath is rhythmic, vital, and visibly tied to life itself. When breath stops, life appears to depart. In many traditions, the words for spirit, soul, or vital essence grew close to the words for wind or breath. Something invisible seemed to move through the living person and then, at death, move on. In the Hebrew Bible and later Jewish thought, life is bound to the breath given by God, and the human person is never merely mechanical matter. In Christian traditions, the soul became the enduring spiritual core of the person, capable of salvation and eternal life. In Islam, too, human life is given by God, and consciousness is tied to a soul entrusted to the body for a time. These traditions differ in theology, but all treat awareness as inseparable from moral and spiritual meaning. In Hindu thought, some schools speak of Atman, the deepest self, not merely personality or passing thought, but a more fundamental inner reality. In many strands of Hindu philosophy, that inner self is ultimately related to Brahman, the deeper reality underlying all existence. Consciousness, in this view, is not an accidental byproduct of matter. It is woven into the structure of being itself. Buddhist traditions take a different path. Rather than affirming a permanent inner self, many Buddhist teachings emphasize impermanence and anatta, often translated as non-self. What feels like a solid person is understood instead as a changing bundle of processes, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness itself, arising and passing away. Ancient Egyptians imagined a person as composed of several aspects, including the Ka and the Ba, each linked to life, identity, and survival beyond death. Ancient Greek thinkers also wrestled with psyche, mind, and soul, sometimes treating them as bound to the body, sometimes as partly distinct from it. Across traditions, the details vary, but the recurring intuition is clear. Human beings felt that consciousness was too inward, too luminous, too strange to be reduced easily to flesh alone. These religious ideas do not answer modern scientific questions in the language of brain networks or neural activity, but they reveal something enduring about the human encounter with consciousness. Before there were laboratories, there was already the sense that inner life carried mystery, dignity, and depth, that to be conscious was not only to function, but to participate in something profound. Whether we look at animals, silent patients, or increasingly capable machines, one old difficulty keeps returning: the problem of other minds. Consciousness is the most immediate fact of your own life, and one of the least directly accessible facts about anyone else. You know your own awareness from within. Everyone else must be inferred. In ordinary life, that inference feels effortless. A friend falls quiet, and you sense worry. A child laughs, and joy seems obvious. A face tightens, and pain becomes visible almost at once. Human beings are deeply social creatures, skilled at reading tone, gesture, gaze, rhythm, and expression. Much of morality depends on this confidence that other people, too, possess an inner life. Usually, that confidence serves us well. Yet science keeps finding edge cases where it becomes harder. A person with locked-in syndrome may be fully conscious while almost unable to move. An infant cannot explain its experience in language, yet may feel comfort, surprise, distress, and hunger with great intensity. A patient may appear entirely unresponsive and still retain hidden islands of awareness that only careful testing can reveal. Recent brain imaging studies have made this especially humbling. In a few cases, patients once thought completely unaware have shown signs of understanding spoken commands by altering their brain activity in detectable ways. Nothing about their outward stillness announced this. The inner world, if present, had become almost invisible from the outside. These cases remind us that consciousness is first person, while science usually works from the outside in. Researchers can observe movement, speech, eye tracking, electrical rhythms, or blood flow in the brain. They can gather evidence, but they cannot step directly into another mind. A measure may suggest awareness without revealing its texture. It may tell us that some experience is present while saying little about what that experience is like. The same problem in different form extends to animals and machines. We can observe flexibility, memory, learning, and communication. We can detect complexity. But complexity alone is not enough. A storm is complex. So is a market. So is a forest. Consciousness seems to require something more, not only organized activity, but a point of view. And that point of view is precisely what remains hidden. There is something ethically important in that hiddenness, because we cannot measure consciousness with perfect certainty. We are often called to respond with humility, to hesitate before dismissing pain, to pause before assuming emptiness, to remember that awareness may flicker quietly behind stillness, behind unfamiliar behavior, behind forms of life that do not mirror our own. The problem of other minds is not only a scientific puzzle, it is also a lesson in carefulness, restraint, and respect. And now the night has grown quieter, and the question of consciousness can return to where it always belonged, to the simple nearness of your own awareness, here at the edge of sleep. All evening, we have circled this mystery from many directions. We have watched the brain gather sound and light into a world. We have followed attention as it brightened one corner of experience and left another in shadow. We have seen memory carry the self through time, the body tune the mind from within, dreams reshape reality under softer rules, and science approach the border of awareness without quite crossing into its center. Perhaps that is the most fitting end to a story like this. Not a final answer, but a gentler relationship with the question. Consciousness does not need to be solved tonight. It is enough to have drawn a little closer to it, to have noticed that the most familiar thing in life is also among the least fully explained. You have known consciousness in many forms already. You have known it bright and effortful in daylight, narrowed by worry, widened by beauty, softened by fatigue, altered by music, carried by memory, and loosened by dreams. Every night, without ceremony, you take part in one of its strangest transformations. The waking world grows quieter, thoughts become less orderly, images drift free of their anchors, the self itself becomes lighter, less defended, less intent on holding everything together. Soon, perhaps, that change will happen again. The room will matter a little less. The day will release its grip. A sentence may blur at the edges. A memory may pass through without asking to be understood. Consciousness will not fail. It will simply become something softer, less like a spotlight, more like a tide withdrawing from the shore. And in that softening, there is a kind of trust. You do not solve sleep before entering it. You do not master the dream before it arrives. You allow awareness to loosen, and the mind, which has worked so hard all day to organize the world, begins at last to let the world go. Perhaps that is one of the quietest lessons hidden inside this whole subject. Consciousness is not only mystery, it is also rhythm. It gathers, brightens, tires, drifts, dreams, and returns. By morning, it will come back to you in its firmer waking form. But tonight, it is allowed to soften. Tonight, it may become spacious, dim, associative, almost oceanic, moving by older and gentler laws. So let it go now, slowly. Let the questions grow quiet. Let the need to understand give way to the permission to rest. Let the mind that has spent this evening contemplating itself become lighter, dimmer, calmer, and less bound to words. The mystery will remain until morning. For now, there is only the dark, the breath, the fading thread of thought, and the gentle fact that you do not need to hold consciousness any tighter than this. Good night.